Welcome to our webinar. This evening, we're going to be talking about focus on efficiency, virtual testing, and workflow innovations in eye care. And I am Rachel Krug. I'm the CEO of Virtual Field. It's great to be here. And we're joined by Dr. Janelle Davison. Dr. Davison is an award-winning optometrist with 18 years of experience in private practice. Not only has she founded her own Brilliant Eyes Vision Center, but she's also a visionary at the Dry Eye Institute, co-founder of Paradigm Optical Retail Solution, and co-founder of SCORE Nonprofit. Dr. Davison, I don't know how you do it all, but this is amazing, and we are so honored you're here with us to talk about efficiency. At Virtual Field, we are an exceptional eye exam experience with visual field, color vision, and pupillometry exams all in one patient-friendly experience. And with that, we'll get into today's agenda. So we're going to talk about why workflow efficiency matters in eye care, workflow innovations transforming eye care, Virtual Field and driving efficiency with Virtual Field. Dr. Davison will share a success story on efficiency gains with Virtual Fields, and then we'll take any questions. Feel free to drop questions into the Q&A as you think of them, but we will take questions at the end, but don't feel like you have to wait. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Davison.
Hey, so I'm so excited to be here, Rachel. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about efficiency. If you guys know me or know anything about me, I am big into innovation, technology, but efficiency is how I'm able to do so many things. I'm really big on implementing, really thinking about the patient journey, really finding what's going to fit into my practice. So that way I keep that patient experience where I want it to be, keep the office efficient because I got to eat lunch. I close at 12 every day from 12 to 1. I've done that out the gate since my practice started, and I have to go home. So usually when I leave the office, I have kids that I'm Ubering around. So I have to be really efficient throughout the day. And so that way I still have the patient outcomes that I want, patients have the experience, but I also own my practice. So that way I'm able to reach those revenue goals as well. And so, just a little bit of extra background on me. I did start my practice cold in 2010. I did grow that practice, Brilliant Eye Vision Center, from not a record to my name. My practice, when I started, it was a lease and it was an old Washington Mutual. They're not even around anymore. And so I had to really be innovative, really think about efficiency, really think about that patient experience, and also listen to my patients. And we'll talk about the success story, how Virtual Visual Field has been a really successful in my practice for efficiency wise, but also the patient experience. And then from that, I really got into a lot with ocular surface disease, dry eye, and then I actually started a dedicated dry eye facility in 2024 that is outside of my practice. And so efficiency is key. But workflow and efficiency matter in all facets of healthcare, but especially eye care. A recent study shows that patients get frustrated just waiting 30 minutes, right? So who has gone into the exam room? I've gone in and I'm like, hey, how are you today? And the patient's like, fine. Yes. And the first thing I'm thinking, it's not like their copay didn't get paid. What did the first desk do? I'm thinking like, how long did they wait to see me? Because I know people don't like to wait, right? We're such a busy society. If patients wait beyond 30 minutes, they're frustrated. And we also know from other studies that if you have an optical or retail optical, the longer the wait, the more frustrated they are in the exam room, the less likely they are to go out into the optical and purchase. And so when I have patients and they come in and a little disgruntled, the first thing I'm doing is looking to see how long they waited. We have this little laminated card that floats with our clipboard. We're about 95% paperless, but we still have this like routing form. And so on the routing form, it lets me know quickly what the patient's here for, their medical record number, date of birth, if they're new or established, if they're picked any of our opt-in screenings, and then what time their appointment was. So if I see their appointment was 2:30 and I look at my watch and I try not to be behind, but then I kind of get an idea of how long they've been waiting. So that's first thing, just remember, patients don't like to wait. So if there's any way that you can increase efficiencies, get your patients in and out. My goal is really for them to, from check in to check out, about an hour. So if they come on time, we have virtual paperwork. We have wireless POS systems where they're just swiping their cards that can float around with the staff. Our goal is to check in from time to front with an hour. That includes the dilation, even if they want to pick out glasses. And that includes if we're running any additional testing. Next slide, please. And so efficiencies impact patient care, staff workload, and profitability. And so if you're not efficient, one thing I see here in Atlanta a lot, you can lose patients. You can lose long-term patients. I've had patients that have left practices that have said, I don't have a problem with the doctor at all. I just can't wait 2 to 3 hours to be seen. And the first thing you're thinking, if they're waiting 2 to 3 hours to be seen, in my opinion, I mean, it's got to be like a big retinal practice. It has to be a practice where doctors are seeing, these subspecialty doctors, 90 plus patients a day. And no, these are average optometry practices. And so if a patient is waiting 2 hours plus to see you in optometry practice, we really need to think about efficiency. We really need to think about how that's impacting patient care. Also, your profitability and workload, meaning if you're behind all the time, then the staff is not going to be too pleasant. Morale is not going to be where it should be. It's going to negatively impact your net promoter score. And so if you don't pay attention to your reputation, you should. I made a conscious effort when I first opened, but really about 5 to 6 years ago, to really get my reputation up online. It wasn't bad, but I wanted a lot of reviews. And so I think right now we're 900 something reviews, and I don't pay anybody to do a review. I don't incentivize anybody by getting this. If you give a review, you get this. We make sure that the experience is where it needs to be pretty much every time. We can't please everybody, right? That would look weird if you had 1,500, 1,005.0, because everybody's not gonna have a perfect experience. But we really work on patient outcomes. We think about everything. For me, when I bring it in, I think about it from a revenue standpoint, but also as I'm implementing, what's that patient journey going to look like? I map that patient journey out. I have an idea what the patient should experience, and I make sure as I'm training my staff and my team that we all stay abreast of the ultimate goal is the patient journey. And that's naturally going to reflect you having a really good net promoter score, a good online reputation. Like I said, I think we're at 900 something good reviews at a 4.8. And we don't incentivize anybody to give us a review. We just send them a link, and we just try to make sure that we keep our A level, bring our A game every time. Staff retention. Staff retention. If you are behind staff, like I said, I like to eat lunch. I believe my staff having a good hour break. And if you're serving the public, you need a reprieve, right? Or you need time to go run an errand or go run to the school to take something to your kids. I'm sure not the only one, my kid, who will forget a folder or their gym clothes, their dress out clothes, and you got to figure out how you're going to get it to them. And so staff retention, profitability, inefficiencies can affect all of those things. And then of course, reduce revenues. We already talked about if patients wait too long, there's research that has shown they're less likely to go out there and spend in the optical. And then you just heard an anecdote that you may actually lose a long-term patient because they're waiting a little bit too long to see you in clinic. Next slide, please. And so some common workflow challenges. The biggest challenges is figuring out the gap. You have to take time, sit down, and figure out the gaps and the inefficiencies within the practice. And you have to kind of be realistic, right? Everybody thinks their practice is great. I'm not a Debbie Downer, but I always say there's always room for improvement, right? And so with my husband, who's my partner in the practice, he was like, we're doing great. And I'm like, that's great, but there's always room for improvement. There's always somewhere that we can do better. And so if you kind of always have that mindset, then you're going to always continue to grow and grow and grow and be better, because there's always room for improvement. And so first, you really have to look at where the inefficiencies and where the gaps are. And sometimes you have to walk the patient journey yourself. Two, you have to listen to patient feedback. My thing is, I try to walk the journey, make sure I really understand what I want the journey to look like from my perspective and the patient perspective when I implement. And I kind of sit back and watch. But at the same time, if I get feedback that is consistent, then I pause and say, you know what, we really need to look at this, because I've heard from 2, 3, 4 people the same specific thing. Even though I may think that particular thing that we implemented is working well, there's 4 or 5 patients that are saying that there may actually be a gap. So identifying the gap in most cases is the hardest part. One are usually bottlenecks. We had a big bottleneck. That's why I implemented virtual paperwork. And I did this before COVID. So before COVID was even a thing, I was doing virtual paperwork because I just did not think it was efficient for the patient to fill out paperwork when they got to the office, having to scan that paperwork to put it into the chart. So I was on a hunt. Positive and negative about being kind of a visionary is sometimes you find technologies before anybody even knows about them, right? But they're not quite exactly ready, right? And so we had this virtual check-in paperwork that was great, had some gaps we had to step away, but 2 years later, a big EHR company bought them. And so a particular company now that uses virtual paperwork, we know the OG version of that because we use that, right? And so looking at bottlenecks, looking at ways that you can always increase efficiency, bottlenecks in diagnostic testing. That was one reason why I brought in virtual visual field, is because I scale down, so I have a smaller boutique. I did not like having a particular room that could not be used at all for anything else. So if somebody was in there doing a visual field, then your pre-test room was like shut down. I didn't have another area that was quiet that I could move the visual field to and just waste the space just to have visual field in there. Two, I wanted to kind of reduce my dependency at the time was kind of when COVID, if a staff member didn't show up, if somebody doesn't show up and they have to be in a separate room, okay, who's going to run visual fields? And so that was one of the two big reasons why I sought out, how could I improve the visual field experience? How is it going to make my patient flow more efficient? And then how will it allow me to run more visual fields? And so next slide, limited space. So I have small space. You have to figure out what things are going to allow you to do that and using smaller pieces of equipment. Mobile pre-testing. Pretty much everything in my office now is mobile. We bring it to you. And so that's even your autorefractor. I have a handheld fundus camera. I have virtual visual field. The only thing right now that is stagnant, I have an OCT. And then I had Oculus Cartograph, which is in my another office, but I keep that in a specific room. But if we're doing an OCT, let's say for glaucoma workup, we're bringing the visual field into them. And so now patients come in, their paperwork is done because it's virtual paperwork. They come in, all we're doing is collecting their copay and whatever they opted in for any outside opt-in screenings. We're taking that money and they're going straight into the exam room. And then my techs grab everything from the tech station and go take what they need into the exam room. And the reason I got there is because I would go to other doctors. And only really in eye care do we have like a designated space where we're really compartmentalizing and reducing our revenue because we just got pieces of equipment sitting in the room. And so I would go to my kid's pediatrician visit and I would notice everything is done in the room. We wait in the waiting room a little bit. Next, we're in the exam room. Everything is coming to us. Even if they're going to get vaccines, everything is coming to us. There was never a time that we're bouncing from room to room. And it could be a complete bottleneck where you have to get a patient here to go back. If something wasn't right and you want to repeat it, you got to bring them out another room and put it back into the pretest room. And I just thought that didn't make sense. But that's the way that we have been doing it for years in eye care. And when I lecture to my peers, it's like, you really got to think outside the box. So sometimes just because we're doing something, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to do it, just because we've been doing it for 50, 60 years, right? There's always more ways to be more efficient. And so that's why I really decided, like, how can I really make the process of seeing these patients more efficient, either from the pre-testing to diagnostic testing with my visual field testing, and then streamlining those workflows. And patients actually pay attention. I had a patient that says, I came in to do an exam and he goes, Dr. Davis, I really like what you've done here. And I goes, well, what are you talking about? He was like, it was always so annoying to have to go from one room. You go from the waiting room to a room. You do some things in that room, you get up from that room, you have to go into another room. And then once you're done in that room, if you get dilated, he was like, it was just like so much back and forth. And he was like, and I just thought that was inefficient. And I said, well, you never said anything. He goes, well, every time I went to the eye doctor, that's what you guys would do. And he's like, I really like how I made my appointment, I paid, I came right into the exam room. The tech came right in. I stayed here. Next thing you know, you were in the room. He was like, I really like what you've done. And I said, oh, well, thank you for saying something, because nobody else, we've been doing it now for a year and nobody has said anything. And so patients pay attention, and you'll be surprised how you really start to streamline the process, make their experience better. And it's just the little things, just now going from room to room. Patients will pay attention. They'll tell their friends that they'll get in and out. And you guys are really tech savvy and innovative is how they really reference my office. And then using multifunctional diagnostic tools. So get tools that will do more than one thing if you can, and then also integrating that data into your EHR platform. And most of these new technologies They're smaller in size, but they keep in mind efficiency. So they're thinking about the gaps that we may not be thinking of, so that when you bring those things in, they usually seamlessly go right into practice. Okay, you go to the next slide. And so driving efficiency with virtual visual field testing. Uh, it, since I brought in virtual visual field, not only if I have visual fields where I can never get a clean field, I've had a patient that actually left a bad review because he didn't like taking a visual field because it was uncomfortable. And so he left a review, and it was so funny. He was an older gentleman, and he ripped a new one. He didn't like how he had to sit uncomfortably, how it affect his neck. He just hated the whole experience. He dreaded coming in for his visual field testing. And he goes, so, by the way, I like the doctor, but there's got to be a better way to do the visual fields. And so as I brought in virtual visual field, patients would dread coming in for the glaucoma checks. And so I would say, well, I have a different way than I'm doing it now, because at first I didn't know how people would feel about the virtual reality. And I said, but you will be able to stay right in this exam room. You'll be able to stay in this chair very comfortably, and we're going to bring it all to you. And I go, have you heard of virtual reality? Sometimes they're a little bit older and they're like, well, I've seen it. My grandson has something like that. It's like, well, now we do visual field testing, and it's kind of like a virtual reality game, and it allows you to stay in a comfortable position. You can keep your head back. We don't have to move you. And as I brought them in, initially, I was running myself just to kind of get feedback. And they will all say, I really like this much better. It's easier to do. I get to sit in the chair, and I noticed quickly that visual fields were much better. I think we have a case that we'll be able to show too as well. Is there any questions? Okay. I think she's going to show a video here of what the virtual field looks like. And so I was an OG person, virtual visual field. So I actually have this one. They have the virtual visual field pro now, but I got it back like in 2021. I think I found them online. I looked you guys up myself. I was going to all the conferences. I really liked the idea of virtual visual field. In the beginning, about 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of us ODs were like, I don't know, is it equivalent to the Goldman? You know, we were kind of skeptical, right? We all pretty much knew there had to be a better way. We knew that there had to be a more efficient, more comfortable way for patients, but it was slowly getting to the point where we can have an opportunity. There were only a few other options that were available. But me being me, I said, you know, I'm going to look and find what fits into my practice. I liked the model that was set up, a subscription model. I love subscriptions, right? And so I found them online. I think I reached out, and I'm like, well, how come you guys aren't at shows at this time? And so got reached out. It was very simple, easy to get started. I filled out some paperwork. They shipped it to me. I put my card in. It was like a no-brainer to use. And I'm like, I have been using it. And then now I go and see you guys at shows. I'm like, oh, I feel like an OG, the grandma virtual visual field, because I'm like, I had to find you guys, and now you guys have big booths and everything. And I'm like, oh. And so it's been working great. It is easy to train staff. And if you're short staff, you know, that's being real. I'm a small business. I tend to have 3 to 5 staff members max. And I don't ever want a patient not to have something done or reschedule a patient because the staff isn't there. Simply easy to use. The machine does all the talking instructions to the patient. You can front load them ahead of time. That's what I would do. I teach my staff to do, to front load the patients in. Yes, you can put their trial lenses in there. And it's a magnet in there. I mean, it's just so simple and easy for you to use. And you're going to notice improvement in visual fields and streamlining. And so I pretty much do them on a regular basis. And now when I have my glaucoma workups, it allows me to do the glaucoma testing ahead of time. I still have time to review the scans and still go into the room with the patient to review things. And I'm doing all that in 30, 40 minutes or less, right? While I'm seeing other patients. Before, it took much longer to keep doing the visual field. Then have to move into a different room to have the OCT testing. It was just a big bottleneck. Now a patient could be in and out just like I would allot a 30-minute time slot, but they're getting medical testing, their updated visual field scan, visual field testing, OCT scan. I'm reviewing it because it gets put right into my system. I'm looking at it and it just go right and explain things look good, or we need to start drops, or we're going to refer you for SLT or iDose or something like that. Next slide, please. And success story. And so I think this is my story here as a patient that was diagnosed with normal tension glaucoma, and so caught with sleep apnea, all that good stuff. But we can never get a visual field. I don't think we have the one on here that's her one that's not virtual visual field. But a patient could never get her visual field reliable. I assume she just, and that even I was like, maybe it's just me. So then I ended up referring her for a consult to the glaucoma center that I work with. I was like, maybe it's just me. Let them do a visual field on her and see. They couldn't get a reliable visual field. For years, we almost couldn't even look at the visual field as part of our process of how this patient's being managed because it was not reliable at all. And I think I had the other one in there. I don't think it made it into the slide deck. And so the first year we got the visual field in test in, virtual visual field, it was her year to have her updated visual field testing. And this was the first year that we had false positives, 1%, because it's usually like, it's like off the map. Like I've never even seen some of these false positives and these fixation losses. And for her, this was like beautiful. And so I was like, if she can do this virtual visual field, then we're going to be golden. Because prior to this, we could never get a reliable feel for her. And I'm assuming it was just positioning. It wasn't comfortable for her, and she would just kind of zone out. And I think the virtual visual field, it's kind of like virtual reality, is something new. These are older patients, so this allows them to feel like they're part of innovation and technology that she was paying attention the entire time. So this is one of the first times we were able to get an actual reliable visual feel for her, which was amazing. And so I see that across the board once I brought in virtual visual field. It's just because patients, I think we underestimate sometimes how taxing diagnostic testing is. Patients' glaucoma, their glaucoma or macular degeneration, plaque nail testing, these are things that could really impact their life, meaning their overall visual health. They're already anxious coming in, and then they have this test that they have to do that they don't necessarily enjoy, is not comfortable. And sometimes patients zone out and they know they're zoning out, or they're getting tired, they just start clicking the button because they're not comfortable. And that's removed some of that barrier that I feel with patients. I don't have them coming in as anxious, canceling appointments, trying to reschedule, just really tense because they don't want to do the visual field testing. And so that's one thing on the morale, the actual psychology of it. I think sometimes we overlook that. I talk a lot in my talks about that empathetic care, just being empathetic, just kind of putting yourself into this patient's shoes. A lot of things we don't think about until we're in that spot, right? And so God forbid, hopefully, I don't ever have any eye related issues, but I don't want that time where I'm dealing with glaucoma or plaque nail testing for me to really sit and say, you know what? This is not fun, right? You should be able to anticipate things and listen to your patients, look at inefficiencies in the office, but also how can you always level up the patient experience? And I think if you always are thinking ahead, how can I improve any facet of my practice? But diagnostic testing is one. We'll always get all the fancy tools, but how can I improve that experience for the patient? And also in improving that experience, get more reliable testing, because the ultimate goal is to protect and preserve their vision. And when you just don't have reliable testing, it's really hard to do that. And you don't want the barrier to be just because it's uncomfortable for patients. I think, is there another slide? And so we didn't have that many slides. And so basically, if you have any questions, if there's any apprehension, some doctors I met at SECO that came over, I think, like I said, most ODs, most MDs now, we know that virtual visual field testing, or it's very equivalent to the gold standard, which is the Humphreys visual field testing. You're going to get more than the information that you need if you're monitoring and managing, working closely with their glaucoma surgeon with visual field testing. In most cases, you may even notice that testing is a lot more reliable, especially if you have some patients where they just didn't like taking the test and it wasn't comfortable for them. Remember, most of our patients that are dealing with some of these things with glaucoma, macular issues, they're older population. So comfort is a big deal. If their neck position, their back, that really can negate how well they're able to perform. Now I'm watching and helping to take care of my aging parents. You really start to get in tune to, this may not be a comfortable situation. How can I make this better for patients? Easy to implement in practice. Like I said, it's I probably can get my 16-year-old son to do it. If I'm short staffed, that's why I like having it. Everything is web based. You can go right online and set up your patients, put the prescriptions in there. Very easy to put the trial lenses in. I think when I met a doctor at Seco, he said, well, how do you put the prescription in there? It calculates it for you. You can put it in there. Very simple and easy to use. It doesn't die too quickly on us. We do keep it charged. If we know we have a lot of visual fields that day, we just keep it on the charger. But we haven't had any issues with battery life. You can also do other additional testing like color vision on there if you want. pupil testing. So there's so many things that you could do, that multifunctional aspect of it. You can run your screenings on there. There's so many things that you could do where you're not tying up one particular room. For me, having a smaller practice, instead of wasting space with a pre-test room, I turn that into another exam room. And so with a small footprint, I have 3 full functioning lanes, a lab, an optical, an office, and a break room. And with my square footage, people are like, how are you able to do that? Because I think outside the box, right? And thinking outside the box keeps my practice innovative, keeps my patient experience a cut above the rest, and allows me not to have to solicit and pay for reviews, because patients know when they come in, it's just a different experience. And I'm always thinking about, how can I improve the experience for the patient so that way I can ultimately improve their clinical outcomes, and then that's always going to translate for me as a business owner to additional revenues.
Awesome. We do have a couple questions that I'm going to read for you, Dr. Davison. The first is, do you have your staff stay with the patient while they're using virtual field?
No, they don't have to. It's up to you. They don't have to. The thing about the machine, it monitors them and it will restart if they think that they're not paying attention. So they don't have to. Usually my staff will start it. If we have another patient in between, they can go pull up the site and watch them on there and see how they're doing. And you can restart it yourself from afar. Then they'll go back in a peek, but they don't have to stay in there with them. That's kind of your clinic flow. Me, I don't always have more than one tech, and so that might not be very efficient just to have my tech sitting in there. I try to schedule my workups towards the end, right before lunch and towards the end of the day. So that does free up my tech if we have somebody where she may have to stay in the room a little bit longer, but typically not necessarily, not the whole time, no.
Uh, Great. Thank you for that. Um, so there's another question here. If you are starting a new practice, would you recommend just getting virtual field and skipping a tabletop altogether?
I don't have hardly any tabletop equipment. And if I had to start it all over, that's what I would do. Virtual visual field and most of the handheld things. Nowadays, efficiency, mobility, patient experience is the top of mind, and you have some of the brightest and best coming up with things that eye care providers that we aren't even thinking about. And so if I had to start all over again, I would just go straight with virtual. There's really no reason to clog up a space, which is important because I started my practice cold. And so a lot of things that I do now, I question, why weren't we doing that before? Because it probably would allow me to start with a smaller space, really focus on getting that revenue, not running through my operating capital so much. And then on top of that, break down costs. The subscription model is amazing, right? And so cash flow is important. And so dishing out thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars at one time, or taking a lease for a piece of equipment, you know, I personally, I would. And I've switched over to pretty much all handheld. Even my auto refractor is handheld auto refractor with keratometry. I don't really, only thing I have right now that I have that is standalone is because it's not even an option to have it where it's mobile, is my OCT.
Awesome. Thank you for that. There's another question on the types of patients that you're using virtual field with. Are you using this on primary open angle glaucoma patients or only glaucoma suspects? Tell us about the range of patients that
All
you're.
of the above. So initial glaucoma testing, monitoring, initial glaucoma testing where I'm running their OCT, visual field, and that to determine, because I do a lot of with my glaucoma specialist, first line SOT. And so I don't necessarily always start patients, especially my younger patients. So plaquenil testing, macular, pretty much anything that you will run a visual field on, you have the capability of doing that on here.
Okay, thank you for that. And then are the reports pretty similar to the traditional reports?
Yes, yes. You have the GHT, pattern standard deviation, what you're used to seeing, where the prescription is, the false positives, fixation losses, everything that you're used to seeing, it's there.
Awesome. Um, so many questions. This is so great. Let's do a few more. Um, in that, here's one that's really interesting. So process changes can be challenging. How would you recommend doing it without like a major disruption to the practice?
And so yeah, that's a great question. Disruption is not necessarily a bad thing, right? And change doesn't always feel good. But if you are really good about thinking through the flow, knowing how your practice works, stepwise everything down, have a time where it's either an hour in the morning or afternoon, where you kind of shut down and really explain to the to the staff why you're doing this and how this is going to improve things for them, give them back time, improve the patient experience, and also bring more revenue into the practice. It's good, right? Not saying that anything I've done it didn't hurt, but just because it doesn't feel so good in the beginning doesn't mean the kinks don't get worked out, right? And then you have to be willing to really monitor the process and see where you can make changes. And so, but for there's other things that have been implemented I felt like are way harder than virtual visual field. This is honestly one of the easiest things to do. You just have to decide, okay, and where am I going to bring it to the patient? You know, am I going to need more than one? If you're busy practice, you might need more than one, because then you don't want a patient waiting that needs a visual field because somebody else is using a virtual visual field, especially if you're going to run it for color vision screenings. You may have one that's kind of just can go wherever and one that stays with when you have your patients coming in for their glaucoma testing, macular degeneration testing, things like that. So determine how many you're going to need in the practice, but it's not without a little bit of pain. But I'm, like I said, this was like 2021, 2022, that the pain of not having it, the inefficiencies in my office, the staffing issues in my office, this definitely outweighs that. And like I said, I've implemented a lot of things, and this was one of the least painful things to be able to implement into the practice.
There's a question on the multiple languages. Have you used the language options on Virtual Field?
I haven't used the language options, but in the event that you need it, I'm sure that's going to be beneficial.
Yes.
I haven't so far, but if it that's amazing that if if someone doesn't speak the English language and it has other options, that is a plus.
Yeah, we do have over 40 languages
Yeah,
now.
that is a plus.
Well, ever needed, it is there. That is a great question. There's a few questions on the different types of exams on Virtual Field. I'm going to share a slide once we're done with other. Oh, somebody's saying in Florida, Creole works great.
Creole. Yeah, I know about Creole. I used to go to school in New Orleans.
Appreciate that. Let's do just two more here, and then I'm going to just answer the questions on what exams are offered on a slide. So the first is, what should a practice owner consider when evaluating the ROI of virtual field?
And so basically how many fields you plan to run, you want to look at your reimbursements, see where they are in your state, determine how many plans that fields you're going to run. If I'm doing a subscription, my thing is I need to be running more fields than my subscription per month. Right. And if you're going to outright buy a piece of equipment, you need to determine how many tests you need to be running per day, per week, per month. Break down what's easier for you to look at, and you need to be making those goals. If not, then you're not making your ROI, right? Subscription model for me for a lot of things is easier because I know this is what it is every month. This is how many tests I need to be running per month to break even. And if I'm making a profit, I need to be running these many tests.
Makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then I'm going to take one more here, in that somebody's asking about the space considerations also. So you said you have a small office. Could you give a little bit more detail on the size of the
1,200 square feet. With a full optical, I have about 600 frames, front desk, a small finishing lab, break room, office for myself. And now because I took away a pre-testing area and made everything mobile, I have 3 full functioning lanes.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And again, there's a couple questions on what exams are offered. So I'll cover that very briefly. And Dr. Davison, I'd love you to jump in. On our Virtual Field Pro, we have 13 exams. All of the visual field exams, superior 36 for ptosis, Esterman, and full field for driving. Our Pro model also has the pupillometry, the kinetic Goldman, and an eye tracking camera. And then our virtual field basic has 11 exams. So again, the 24 to 32, all of your thresholding exams, screening, superior 36 for ptosis, Esterman, full field for driving, the color vision. And we do fixation monitoring through the Hydro-Krakow method. So the software, like Dr. Davison says, will keep the patient focused on the fixation point. Not sure if you have anything to add to that, but I did want to just run through because there were several
Yeah.
questions.
So those are all the tests that that are necessary to run. I have, like I said, I have the virtual visual basic one, but I was an OG, so I've been using it for a while. They've grown a lot, but it has all the tests that we need. So you just determine your office flow. Does it make sense for you to do the color vision on there? If you want the pupillary exam, whoo, that's a tongue twister. That's on the Pro. But everything that I need to do for ptosis testing, my 24-2, 10-2, 30-2 Central, everything that you need is there if you want to run the screening. But it's important just to know your office flow, because just because every single test is here doesn't mean you need to do every single test, right? Your whole goal is to be more efficient. And so you want to look through here and say, where are the bottlenecks with my visual field testing? Where are my bottlenecks with color vision? Where are your bottlenecks? And then see how this is going to reduce that, and just set a plan about how you're going to go about implementing. Do I need one device? Do I need two? But every test that you need to do to properly manage a patient is going to be on one of these, Visual Field Basic or Visual Field Pro.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, So if you'd like to learn more, have more questions, feel free to book time with the team. You can find us at virtualfield.io. Dr. Davison, thank you so much for these insights on efficiency and caring for your patients and setting up a beautiful patient experience. And thank you so much for being a customer of ours since 2022. We always appreciate the OGs, and I'm so glad that you've been with us that long and that you did this webinar with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.